Greetings and welcome to this final session of day 2 of eDARE 2021. Nisa Bulavinaka, Wan Keng Kong Lim, and greetings to everyone. Welcome to those of you who have joined us for the first time, and welcome back to all who have attended previous sessions of eDARE 2021. Because of COVID, DARE, Discernment and Radical Engagement, a program of the Council for World Mission. Because of COVID, DARE has mutated into eDARE. E, because we are meeting in virtual space. But we hope that when borders open and we can travel, that CWM will go back to holding face-to-face DARE forums so that we can listen and share fellowship and have a meal together, because there is having that opportunity to meet and share our thoughts face to face is special. Some housekeeping matters. Please note that the presentations are recorded, and the intention is to edit and post those on the eDARE webpage. As we begin, we will pose a couple of questions on your screen. Please answer those questions to help us plan future eDARE events. And for those of you who have questions, I hope all of you have questions and you want to ask the members of the panel. But we ask that you put your questions in the Q&A feature of Zoom or the Facebook comment section, and the eDARE team will gather those questions and post them during the discussion time. We have a very creative and critical panel in this session. You will find fuller biographies of the members of the panel at the eDARE webpage, and a link to that page has been placed on the chat box. Please look there to learn more about the members of the panel, where they work, where they are located, and their commitments. But I'm delighted to introduce to you our 3 presenters. Peter Cruchley is going to be our first presenter, followed by Su Chi Lin, and then the 3rd presenter is Malia Vaurasi. And after the 3 presentations, John Robert Lee will read his poem, Watchman. And then after the presentations and the poem, Vedakani will offer a short response to the poem. She is our listener, and she will be listening to these presentations and offer some thoughts and some words that are meant to help us start our discussion. I will now call on our presenters. Our first presenter is Peter Cruchley, and the title of his paper that I have, he may have changed the title, and that's fine. Deposing Massa Jesus, Tracing Aspects of a Decolonial Humanity Through Magnificat Moments Amongst a Colonial Mission Archive. Peter.
As always, a delight to be with you all, and my thanks to Sione, Mike and the colleagues for this opportunity to come and share with you today. I'm going to speak to some slides that bring some of the materials I want to share in this presentation. The full presentation is not possible at the time we have together, so I'm shortened it, and hopefully later it will grow again. So, friends, many of you know perhaps CWM is committed to unmasking white Christian supremacism in our archive, providing an uncomfortable mirror for ourselves, we find that Christian mission is rooted in a public theology constructed by white, colonial, racist anthropology. And mission is the most public way white, Christian, male gaze makes itself seen and felt. And this paper highlights some of those in our story who sought to poke this white gaze right in the eye. So, the juvenile missionary magazine of the London Missionary Society carried a story about Judy Campbell. She was an enslaved person from St. Vincent who had been converted by the missionaries. And you can see an excerpt from the story on the screen here. Testimony Judy makes to white supremacist mission and its idol, Massa Jesus. By 1845, the slave Massas had been deposed and compensated for the inconvenience of emancipation in 1833. However, slave Massas remained ever present, reigning supreme, especially in the shape of Massa Jesus. The roots of this story you can see, and her testimony lie, of course, in the LMS's deep desire to reassure the Massas that they could profit by turning rebellious slaves into civilized, obedient, good Christian ones. And this bit of the story, as you can see, follows a familiar type, in which Judy is really just an object in the LMS strategy to raise funds for its work and propagandize its worldview, especially among the young working class in the UK. But there are signs that some met a very different Jesus to the Massa Jesus and made public their ways, their witness in ways which were contested by the LMS. So my presentation here today will focus only on two of those, Brother Cupido and Emma Martin. Brother Cupido was a Khoi man from the Cape Colony of South Africa. He was LMS's first black evangelist given sole charge of a frontier mission station. Cupido appears first in the LMS Director's Report of 1805, where he is described as a man uncommonly notorious for vice, distinguished above all pagan fellows for the enormity of his crimes. And this etching, which is published of him by the LMS in 1816, is done, of course, to present him now in fine Western dress, making public LMS claims that the gospel civilizes even the most savage. But in that same year that this etching was made, Cupido wrote to the LMS, and part of the text of that letter is on the screen. The text gives testimony to his conversion through Christianity. But beyond this is his testimony that the LMS also needed to convert. And in some of the highlighted texts where he speaks about persecution and discouragement, these come from white settlers who were shooting at him, and from fellow white missionaries who refused to respect him. And his South African biographer reports that Cupido was never paid by the LMS for his service to them. In fact, the LMS hero of Africa, Robert Moffat, who was sent on inspection of the LMS mission, ordered Cupido to be sacked in 1824 for his shameful service and lack of success. And a month after this, Cupido had to leave the mission station and live with a fugitive slave because of pass laws which had been created by Lord Clarendon, the LMS patron. And the archive reports news of Cupido's death in 1846, and that the poor boy, as he was called, manifests very great patience and resignation until he died. But there is good ground to hope that Cupido has gone to heaven. So the question is, can the LMS valediction really just be poor boy? One may remark upon Cupido's resignation, flattened as he was by the LMS public theology of Massa Jesus, demanding all and with no return. But Cupido's letter speaks of his confidence in Jesus, not just to save the vulnerable, but to challenge the powerful, and questions where shame and disgrace lie. Emma Martin was a British critic of the LMS. He breaks into the LMS story because of a meeting in Manchester on October 4th, 1844. She breaks in because she has no voice in our materials. The LMS sought to silence her at the time. And so we only know of her through newspaper reporting and through her own pamphlet published to rebut the claims made by LMS of her at the time. Her pamphlet is entitled The Missionary Jubilee Panic and the Hypocrites. And you can see on screen some quotations from it. Despite the attempts to silence Emma Martin in the meeting and expel her, that woman, as the LMS J.W. Massey called her, commenting also on the outrageousness that she did not wear a corset, her critique nevertheless breaks out still, and she shines a light on LMS missionary capitalism and their patriarchy, and reminds us that the power play of mission movements has been contested abroad and at home. So she speaks of the lack of concern for the working classes producing the dresses for the rich middle classes, who instead were worried about poverty abroad. But at the same time, of course, we have to notice the lack of solidarity between Martin's class analysis and her race analysis. And that has to be reflected back always to white radicals and progressives today. And you might contrast her with the visit at the same kind of time by the African-American abolitionist Sarah Parker Remond, who went to Lancashire to call for solidarity between those working in the Lancashire cotton mills and the pickers who were bringing the cotton to them. These stories expose the simultaneous construction and subversion of the colonial personae through mission. The poor boy and that woman, singly and together, testify to mission as an act of othering. And LMS baptized these others into an anthropological vision which triangulated race, gender, class, and power in the figure of Massa Jesus, and points to the persisting place race, gender, class, and power have as key pillars in constructing the Massa's house and his plantation which surrounds it, and the idol erected at the heart of it, and the mission station extending its reach. Yet these figures also subvert and expose the Christian colonial personae. Cupido is paraded as an exemplar of the new creation in Christ, that black people can become human through the power of the gospel, until their profitability fades and they can be discarded. But Cupido calls into question and for account the mission organization so willing to literally capitalize on them. Martin is ignored, expected to remain compliant to the silence expected of women. Both, however, favour uprising as the basis of claiming their true decolonial personae. Cupido and Martin live out a rebellion demanded by the denial of a humanity they know is theirs by right and that of others around them. They come at this from different directions as reflects their different locations in the colonial space. But Cupido finds Christianity a mechanism for navigating colonial space and uses it to secure some foothold in the territories LMS with others stole from him. And Martin exposes how missionaries dissemble to offer liberation and civilization as a distraction from their complicities in systems which capitalize power, race, and gender just like they do. These historical figures offer testimony for today, which alerts us to those whose decolonial personae threatens the anthropological vision of Christian mission today, still wedded as we are to white, wired, supremacist instincts and desires. There continue to be those who, in being invited to respond to the Massa's Jesus, find in him someone radically other as them. This is the work of the Spirit, made all the harder by the work of the Massa's church. Perhaps Judy, whose story began our reflection, also met this radically other Jesus, and her affirmation of his Massa-iohood was an affirmation of the rising up of the slave Jesus, and a coded call for the casting down of the Massas from their thrones, pulpits, mission strategies, and whip handles. Cupido and Martin remind us like Fanon, that if Europe is a product of Africa, so too are its mission societies. Who must account and atone. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. It's quite helpful to juxtapose that noble savage who remained a poor boy with that public woman who had the courage to subvert the patriarchal, capitalist, slave-driving culture of the time. So I'm sure we'll come back to the questions that you have raised. But we'll move now to our next presenter, Suchi Lin, and the title of her paper, as I have it here, is Aboriginal Mural of Attire and Ethics of Sight. Suchi.
Hi, everyone. This is my pleasure to present my paper here in eDARE 2021. And thanks to Peter and our host. Right now, I'm going to share my screen. My title is Aboriginal Mural of Attire and Ethics of Sight. This article takes the layered approach to explore a charcoal mural in Taiwan by placing these images in their three relevant contexts: Aboriginal attire's cultural landscape, eyes of the spirit, and ethics of everydayness. And how can art connect to the imagination of public theology is the question of my paper. Like most other rural villages in Taiwan, Qingquan, an Aboriginal attire village in Hsinchu County, encounters the crisis of serious population migration, including an aging population and lacking of job opportunities. To engage the community and revitalize its spirit, Barry Martinson and Jesuit missionary and his Aboriginal assistants painted the mural with the Aboriginal theme as a way to recover the village's indigenous religious cultural traditions. Designed to speak to its audiences from the approach of the residents' community, this mural painting recognized the art in its particular context of multicultural society. The visual invitation of a work of art is fundamentally akin to the promotion of thought for public issues, insofar as they are built from a network of claims about speaking to our current situation and where our presence could lead. Looking at the work of art in the public space could be a sacred act. It helps viewers to desire the truth and goodness rooted in God's divine revelation that can bring renewal to the world. This mural becomes a bridge for the discourse between the self and society. According to Aboriginal scholar in Taiwan, Daniel Bays, Taiwanese indigenous people live alongside their Han neighbors who consider the Han culture to be the carriers of civilization and looks down on them. Being a civilized Aboriginal means to keep away from tribal religions and their symbols. In this regard, the tribal heritages such as language, myths, oral stories, and tribal rituals were and are all in destruction. However, as missiologist Eduardo Fernandez writes, good indigenous art affirms the sacredness of the local community. Each culture has its own visual language and symbol. Their incorporation into worship, while inculturation brings together the gospel message and the best of their culture, art often being foremost. Looking closely, on the upper center of the wall, a giant cross is painted on the top of the church entrance. On the left-hand side of the mural, two men in the front dressed in colorful clothing with a wooden pole on their shoulders On the right-hand side of the mural, 3 women dressed in traditional clothing are engaged in domestic activities of weaving, nurturing babies, and pounding food with pestles and mortar. A woman making clothes on the floor with facial tattoos that signify her weaving ability. The mural's visual language of everydayness enables a fuller understanding of Christ's incarnation, where God is present in humanity of every culture and religion. We start to realize the reason why this giant cross adorned with the diamond patterns, which represent the eyes of the ancestral spirits for protection, can offer people self-identity. However, it is not unusual to see the eyes of the ancestral spirits in the context of contemporary Aboriginal art in Taiwan. Taiwan artist eDARE uses lily to blend both Christian iconography and Taiwanese Aboriginal symbol, providing a space for an intercultural and interreligious aesthetic dialogue. In this work, rooted in the land, eDARE also integrates ancestors' eyes into his understanding of the sacred. On either end of the cross arms, inside 2 lilies, 2 big eyes are on either end of the cross arms, and 3 small ones are located in the green background. Let's back to the religious view in the Qingquan mural. It is worthy to notice its portrayal of the everyday life experience. We see in this image the vision of Atayal tribal life, in which the distinctions between sacred and secular doesn't apply. People's postures in the image embody the life of creativity in the whole Atayal community. For example, the woman's activity of weaving gives us a hint to understand the notion of God from the Atayal's perspective. In the Atayal culture, God is the one who weaves. God unfolds to God's people the plan through the act of people's daily activities. Not surprisingly, there is emphasis on the theme of sacramentality in an Aboriginal context that suggests the idea of inviting the spirit of the ancestors. In the animistic context of an Aboriginal village, art, religion, and sacred are deeply interlaced together. This worldview of the Aboriginals is characterized by the spiritual life that is ongoing in a dynamic time continuum. Atayal mural provides us an opportunity to rediscover the Christian message of the sacred communion in another culture and religion. While encountering an Aboriginal work of art, the viewer acknowledges the importance of the otherness of the art as something in itself. He or she can be surprised and wondered by this otherness. In sum, the aesthetics of Qingquan church mural has lived for a space of discussing ethics of vision, the attitude one should have in contemplating a work of art. When one engaged in the visual work, its capacity to invite us to an interdisciplinary dialogue away from the truth claim inside the church has clear implications for public theology. For the visitors from outside, people can come to learn and rediscover the diversity and fullness of the Aboriginal lifestyle. Its potential on deleting the barriers between art and life provides a platform of conversation between church and society, bringing cultural revival to the community. The act of looking shapes our mind and thought. The process of seeing and its ethics manifested in the arts could be the equivalent sources to the text for theological reflection. What do we learn from the process of seeing a work of art? This church mural by Father Martinson brings access to the interrelated reality through tradition and contemporary, separation and unification. self and the other. Looking at an Aboriginal mural is a form of social responsibility, an ethics of sight that reminds us why a work of art is capable of speaking to the world today. Thank you.
Thank you, Suchi. Work of art can still speak to the world today, as you have said. But those of us, as you use the image, those of us from outsiders don't know how to read Indigenous art, and this is very helpful that you had presented the mural from Ching Chuan in meaningful ways. Let me just put a question to you now, and hopefully we can come back to that. But you mentioned the eyes of ancestral spirits that we don't see in that cross in the mural. And then you referred to the rooted in the land art, and you referred to the two eyes on the arms. But I saw that the line went down to what appears to be a womb at the bottom of that cross. And I'm just curious if there's a gender element also working there. But I thank you for your work. I mean, it ties back to some of the images that Peter used in his PowerPoint of the slaves, but art still speak in very powerful ways. So thank you for that. And that is a good way of moving to our third presenter, our next presenter, Malia Vaurasi, who will present her work. If Malia would turn on her camera. Thank you. Malia, your turn.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for allowing me this space to create and present to you all. I prepared a bit of a speech to complement the artwork that I created, and hopefully through my reading it, the interpretation or an explanation of what I had intended, I suppose, is communicated. So yes, when reflecting on the theme this year, Rise to Life, doing theology in public spaces, I drew it back home to the Pacific. I took the opportunity to reflect on our ocean of struggles that Pacifica people face day to day. When I say face, I mean face. The greedy, self-serving hands of the empire, the foreign powers, the large corporations, they continue to threaten the prosperity of our people, our cultures, our land, and our ocean. The wanton nuclear testing conducted by France in Moahi Nui and the US in the Marshall Islands 75 years ago continues to threaten the health, the lives, and futures of our people. France and the US continue to shirk their responsibility for the injustices of nuclear testing in the Pacific. The people of the Bikini Atoll for generations have been displaced from their ancestral homes. The US continue to ignore reports that the nuclear waste they dumped in Runit Dome in the Marshall Islands is leaking into our oceans, poisoning our fish, and of course our people. Some of our Pacific brothers and sisters continue to fight for their right to sovereignty. Moahi Nui, Kanaki, and West Papua continue to fight their colonial oppressors. In the face of a COVID-19 pandemic that has disproportionately affected Kanak people, the French government, despite objections, continue to push forward for a December referendum to decide the independence of Kanaki. West Papuans for over half a century have resisted the bloody Indonesian oppression of their people, their culture, and their land. We are not free until we are all free. Deep sea mining companies continue to greenwash and downplay the obvious threats that experimental deep sea mining poses to our Pacific Ocean. Once again, the Pacific is looked down upon as the empire's testing ground. The displacement of Pacific people by the exploitation of their ancestral land, for example, the phosphate mining in Banaban, which saw an entire people removed from their island. Also, the mining and clearing of thousands of hectares of sacred West Papuan forests, As I speak, they are carving roads deep into the red earth to transport the palm oil and timber to feed the greed of the empire. As the world convenes in COP26 next week, our Pacifica people are living the experiences of climate change. Rising sea levels continue to threaten our shorelines, entire cultures, and the homes of our coastal people, unearthing burial grounds and poisoning our plantations. These affronts to our freedoms, our way of life, our right not only to live but to thrive are not passively accepted. Seeing these hands of greed and exploitation, our Pacifica people continue to resist, to hold on to the values of community, reciprocity, kinship, conservation, and the traditional knowledge and wisdom of our forebears. We build seawalls and plant mangroves to protect the land and homes where we wish to live and share with our children and their children and the generations after. We protect our fish from the exploitation by cutting nets of foreign fishing vessels illegally fishing in our waters. We use traditional knowledge of conservation such as tambu to conserve and care for our environment. We pass on our oral histories and knowledge to our children so that they too can pass this wisdom onto theirs, so that our struggles and triumphs are not forgotten, and that with that knowledge, our future generations are empowered to push forward. We plant and eat the food of our ancestors, the same crops that the empire attempts to undermine, yet seeks to profit from. We speak and pass on our languages, the languages they taught us to be ashamed of. We see through the sweet words and generous gestures of the empire for what they truly are. We celebrate collectiveness and a communal way of life. We gather in our streets and on our screens in solidarity, calling on our government and their governments to do the right thing. We protest through our collective actions, writings, art, and voices against the doublespeak of politicians and corporations that view our homes as nothing but resources to be plundered. I chose to use weaving as a symbol of this resistance, an art form linked to the sacred, to our ancestors. In my Rotuman culture and in many others across the Pacific, mats are present in our everyday lives and are an important cultural and also in important cultural life events. And to me, it is a symbol of the past, present, and future, a reflection of the values that we hold dear and continue to pass on. Weaving is used here as a symbol for the collaboration and resistance of our people against the twisted, selfish, and unsustainable systems propagated by Babylon. Here we are working together, knowing that we share this ocean, and our individual struggles are intertwined and affect each and every one of us. Weaving together our experiences, our knowledge, our solidarity to protect our ocean, our lands, our culture, our home from the hands that only know how to exploit, to subjugate, to murder, steal, and pillage. In tying in the importance of public theology, I believe it goes without saying that Christianity is something that is deeply intertwined in our Pacifica cultures. To speak from my specific context, the way that my Rotuman grandmother raised me showed me that our identity as Rotumans, our practice of the Rotuman culture, cannot be severed from Christianity. We give to the church as we would give to our own kin, sometimes even more. The seemingly endless generosity of our people, the act of giving without the expectation of return, is how the Hanisi, the devotion, care, the love, how the depth of the significance of a relationship, just as that with the church, is affirmed. Therefore, I think the importance of the church's duty in reciprocating this care cannot be understated. Public theology can be attributed to the support and establishment of the nuclear-free and independent Pacific movement in the 1970s, and the continued work of the Pacific churches who are engaging with Indigenous communities across the Pacific in climate change, nuclear justice, and supporting the sovereignty of West Papua, Moahinui, and Kanaki. Christianity is tightly woven into our worlds. Churches are more than capable of playing a meaningful and active role in our collective resistance, or else their hands simply remain the idle tools for the empire. There is no in-between. Churches, through public theology, offer a strong, significant, and a beautiful strand to weave in our mat, to be woven into our collective fight to rise, live, and to thrive. Thank you.
Minaka Malia, thank you for that, for the artwork and for the presentation. But at this point, we invite John Robert Lee to read his poem, Watchman. Robert.
Thank you very much, and hello to everybody again. I'm going to read a poem called Watchman. Just a brief note about it. The voice of the poem is that of a Caribbean citizen, using Caribbean idioms and imagined as someone who is one of the poor and oppressed. But the themes and concerns are universal, as you just heard about the Pacific, and can be applied to any society going through its own sufferation, exploitation, oppression, by whatever form of Babylonian tyranny it is experiencing. Babylon is still with us. The prophet Watchman has dared to speak and dares us to listen. So the poem is titled Watchman, and there's an epigraph from Ezekiel 3:17. Son of man, I have made you a watchman for the house of Israel. Therefore hear a word from my mouth and give them warning from me. And the poem is in 3 parts. Part 1, Babylon, city of man. Ask native peoples who trusted paper promises. Ask Africans chained below decks of slave caravels. Ask Asians and other immigrants from islands of the sea. Ask them about liberal democracy that plants burning crosses on their lawns, knees in their necks, metal in their fleeing backs, that makes them invisible ciphers fenced in minority ghettos, that gives power to autocrats who suppress their votes. Ask. This is Babylon. This is its system of privilege. This is Nimrod's land, Babel in the plain of Shinar. But ask colonies of Babylon, provinces of her empire, carnival and cricket places, multicultural, many racial, all kinds of religions and no religion, sun, sand, sex for cruise ships, petty tyrants and their micro-corruptions, their traffic in diamonds, ivory, children, their golf courses, multi-story condos. Ask the colonized in their complacencies, comforts and shopping malls. Ask about the muted mutterings, even at their ease in Babylon. Second part, chant on Babylon. You might be hearing some dogs behind me. My dogs are barking loudly. Chant down Babylon, part 2. The dreadlocked prophet comes every day to his box under the flamboyant tree in the square by Government House, facing the cathedral, with people passing through to taxi stand and restaurants. And everyday mockers give him talk when he chant down the system, chant down Babylon, blood fire scandals, point with his shaking finger at the pride and selfishness of the busy metropolis. And he chant down meaningless religion, church and state complicity, idols of liturgical masquerade, big pomposity. What God they know? And he chant down the unspeakable corruption that everybody know about, that everybody doing, rich and poor, that he cannot even mention in public. And prophet chant down the oppression of poor like him, no job, food scarce, shack leaking in rain, boss man wicked, virus in the air, sick can't buy medicine, children don't have computer, politician door closed. And he raised his mouth against political camps and their barons. If you don't vote for them, Crapo smoke your pipe, you suck salt, even your family don't know. When he look, he see the good book true. Lust for dollar and cents is root of all evil, all crime in the city. Everybody have a price, everything have a cost. When you pour you like dog, this Babylon, this slave colony of Babylon, and he come out against racism in America, classism in his own island, against hatred for people who are different, and the prophets start to bawl when he see what they're doing with their garbage, to the fish with their plastic, how they cut down trees to build hotel and warehouse and more golf course. And prophet chant and he chant and he chant. all the way to his little place outside the town. Son of man, born of woman, watchman lying on his back in the sea, gazing at seabirds, loving the green hills in the blue distance, admiring children laughing with parents on the sand, hearing a sweet reggae melody coming across the water. He's certain that a new world near, that the Most High planning new heavens and new earth, Zion, far from Babylon, where righteousness rule. And the prophet gives thanks, laugh loud, is peaceful as he listens to the Spirit moving in the casuarinas. Watchman.
Thank you. Spirit moving in the casuarinas. It sings very fine leaves. They really sing well out in the beach. So thank you, Robert.
Thank you very much. Bringing you together as us as a collective on this space, as Sione had said, it's it has not been our usual and traditional way of gathering, but nevertheless, it shows what is possible on this platform, and to engage with as poets and artists, theologians, missiologists, biblical scholar, activists. I'd like to thank all of you, the contributors who have made this session what it is, an engaging space, and to push boundaries and to ask critical questions of who we are, whose we are, and the agenda to which we're working towards, and that is towards this beloved community and transformation of life.